Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on data analysis for quality engineers, exploring tools and strategies. Today, we do have a handout to go along with this webinar, which will have links to different tools that we're going to reference. My name is Molly Colwell, and I have been a quality engineer and have worked with a lot of different customers on their quality goals or applications with using dataPARC. And I'll go ahead and let Melissa introduce herself.
Hello, thanks, Molly. I'm Melissa Kuo. I'm a quality manager at Clearwater Paper, and I have been in the industry for coming up on 20 years now, which is kind of scary. I can't believe it's been that long, but it's been good, and super thankful for all the experience and people that I've gotten to meet along the way. So it's great. I am very excited about the series and you kicking this series off, Molly. I think that this is going to be a very practical way of helping people understand how to apply the tools. So if they learn how to use them, they'll have an immediate way to go and apply them to their different job types. So that's great. As a manager, a quality manager, and a CI leader, I drive a lot of change at our mill, and with needing to make good change comes good decision making and good data analysis. And so the tools that we're going to be talking about today are a great way of using those tools that are within PARCview to be able to make changes and make them quickly. And to be able to make a lot of changes without getting bogged down in all of that data analysis that has to happen to be able to make those changes. So I think this is going to be very practical for people and helpful, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So before we get started, I just wanted to explain the type of webinar we're doing today. It is a solution spotlight, and these ones are going to be available on the dataPARC community forum or on YouTube. And a lot of the times with the solution spotlight, we have a guest speaker or customer, and we have that today, so we're very excited. It's a little bit different than a dataPARC University, where those ones we explain in great detail on how to use the tool, and it really dives into it. So today we're going to be referencing those dataPARC universities if you want more information on how to use it. But really we're going to focus on the tool in general and how it can be utilized. So if you need a little bit more of a how-to, check out those dataPARC universities, which are available on our community forum. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to type them into the question box. It might look a little different depending on which version you're on right now, but go ahead and type those in and we will answer them at the end. Or if we miss your question, we'll go ahead and send you an email with an answer. So just a little bit about our agenda. We're gonna focus on 4 common tasks that a quality engineer might do. So we'll kick off with some daily usage, then we'll go to real-time lab data and how you might visualize that or need to share that with other people. And then we'll discuss maintaining specifications. So from the data mining and viewing it to actually changing those specs. And then I also want to talk a little bit about harnessing SQL and how that can be really powerful in terms of for a quality engineer. And then at the end, we will go to your guys' questions and try and answer all that we can. So to kick things off, I'll hand it over to Melissa to kind of set us up with daily usage.
Yeah, when we come into the mill or the plant or the facility, there are a whole variety of reasons that we need to go back and look at the data. Some of those are reporting, just doing daily checks. Some of those things are operational reviews that may be happening, certificates of analysis that we may need to do, but there's a whole bunch of different reasons that we'll want to go back and check the data and see what's going on. So in this section, we will take a look at some historical trends, setter lines, Excel add-ins, good examples of how we could go back and just take a look at that data on a day-to-day basis.
So diving into some real world examples, first, verifying data is something that I know when I was a quality engineer, I did almost every day, whether it was for a certificate of analysis or another type of report. And really depending on the situation, you're gonna have to ask a bunch of questions or answer, sorry, a bunch of questions. And first you need to know what questions to ask. So we have a couple here. And then you also want to know what information you're starting with. So try and finding, you know, what customer is this for? What product is it? And when was the product made? Those are some initial questions you need answered before you can really dive in to that data.
A couple examples of this might be, you know, notes from the lab or production. That's one I use all the time. So, you know, there's a claim maybe that comes in from a customer and they're asking specific information. I could go back to that run and look up what our lab people said about it. And that tends to be something we do really often. Maybe it's a grade change or, you know, there's special causes that could potentially happen. So when we're working with our operations people and they're doing a good job entering that into their comments in the MDEs, that's a very great way to, it's a great way to document the special causes that can be going on in the process. And so that's something that we watch regularly. Another one that we used, in fact, this morning, and we're going to go over this tool in here in a little bit, is with center lines. We were doing just a quick review. We're working on setting up a new grade, and we were doing a quick review of all of the data. So we went back to a center line, and then we were able just to mentally filter out the downtime, because at the top of the center line, there's a downtime percentage. And so you could just, instead of having to download the data and then filter it and everything, you could just quickly look at that top percentage downtime and mentally filter that out as you're trying to talk through specs with operations.
Yeah, another example with downtime is, you know, if you're starting back up and maybe your first product after that downtime covered the whole startup. And so when you're looking at the value that you get when you're sending that report to the customer, it looks like your values are all out of spec. But then when you go back and look at the data, you see that, oh, we were just coming up from a downtime. So actually, you know, the first 30 minutes of that is not real product. We threw all that away. And so you can use that as evidence to say, nope, this is good quality product. We can go ahead and sell it. It was flagged, you know, through the system by accident. Melissa, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I was just thinking some more about C of A's, and I know this is kind of different depending on, you know, people's processes, you know, and looking at batches, but sometimes that C of A data is designed to cover an entire order, an entire shipment. You know, it's designed for a larger batch than the unique data, and so you can use and go back and look and understand when you get into the details and know that, you know, the smaller increments or the smaller widgets were rejected out of that batch, and only the good material was sent to the customer. So I think PARCview helps you go back in those daily looks and check over the individual widget data or role data rather than just what you're seeing on a C of A, which may be larger batch data.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now I have used a lot of Excel sheets. I have made a lot of Excel sheets. And this type of Excel sheet, or this one in particular, has got to be one of my favorites. It was so well put together. Shout out to Troy, who made it, but it really goes above and beyond and really lays out the data in a way that you can find your answer so quickly. And some benefits with using Excel with PARCview data is that users especially new users, that might be more familiar with Excel. So they're going to be comfortable changing the date range here and then using the tabular like scroll to kind of look for the information they need. And you can pull all the data from different sources. So, I mean, just like you can in PARCview, but this is lined up in Excel, might just be a little more user-friendly for those people who are more comfortable with Microsoft products. Melissa, do you want to talk about this sheet and what you like about it?
I would love to talk about it. From our role labeling standard, we can tell a little bit of information when we get in a role ID, like the year, the paper machine it's made on, what month it's made, and kind of the order of the reel, but that's kind of it from just the role number itself. With this report, I like that it pulls the specific time that the reel was made, and then it pulls all of the data into one page. So if I was to have to go and look at this in the PARCview logs, I would have to open a couple of different MDEs to be able to get all of the test data, and I wouldn't be able to have it all on one page. But this lets me get it all on one page, and then I can easily highlight the specific reel that I'm looking for. If I need to copy and paste then the data and send it to somebody, it makes it easy to do that. It also has a feature where you can collapse and expand the different sections, so it's easy to make it smaller or bigger and review everything quickly in a very shareable format. I also like that it's 100% read only. So if I'm going to go in there and look at MDEs, there's a potential that I could accidentally override a value. But once it's exported to Excel, there's no possibility of that. I can move data around, or I can change the order of the columns without having to fear that I'm messing something up within the MDE sheet. So it makes it in a easier and in a good shareable format.
Yeah, and I do have a quick demo here of some aspects of the sheet. So if you wanted to create something similar for your process, I can kind of show you some key features of this. So I already recorded the demo just to make it a little easier, but so we'll go ahead and play this and talk you through it. So like I said earlier, we have the start and end time up there, and these are actually have some calculations in it. So always go to today's date with the production start and end time, and then you can use that column below for the past report. This is also tied to the data normalized sheet, so then we don't have to type in that value on this sheet and the data normalized sheet. Really, you don't ever have to go to that data normalized sheet. It's just there to pull the data, and the user is interacting with this one sheet. So then once we pull the data, all of the values come up here, and using a series of VLOOKUPs to find the data. And these are all the averages, but as Melissa said earlier, you can actually unhide these columns and see section data. And again, showing those VLOOKUPs. And then we'll jump back over to the data normalized sheet to just show how many columns of data we have. We also had these numbers added to the top, which shows the column number. So when you're using a VLOOKUP, instead of counting that, we put the column number here, and then it's actually referenced in the VLOOKUP sheet. So it's not a static number. So the equation is going to be the same throughout. Go ahead and hide that, and then just scroll back over to the right-hand side just to show that comments are also pulled in here. So if there's more information that you might see, something's out of spec, but then you have a comment based on it, it can just drive that much more information. So if you are looking to expand your knowledge in how to utilize PARCview trends, I'd say that's at the beginner level. We have the tutorials in the help manual to help you sync trends or manipulate them, navigate trends more quickly. We also have a PARCview 101 webinar, which goes through some basics on how to use it and get up to speed on trends and things. And then there's also the trend 1 and 2. So if you're needing to view data in a specific way, you can actually configure it with those ones. And then at a more intermediate level, we have the Run Browser and Excel add-in webinars. And the run browser will help you get the runs the way you want to see them, especially when using Centerline, which we have a Centerline example coming up. And then the Excel add-in webinar can kind of show you how you might use the data normalized sheet in conjunction with the data norm calc sheet so that you can run multiple data normalized sheets but have one calc sheet that the user is interacting with. So those are just some resources that might help you achieve some of those examples that we saw earlier. Okay, the next section we want to touch on is real-time lab data. And how, as a quality engineer, you might be the owner of that data and what to do with it.
All right, Molly, these are some of my favorite tools because you get to see everything in real time. And when they're set up well, you never look at the MDE again. Like, when I go out and view our quality data in operations and look at operator screens or supervisor screens, they pretty much always have a dashboard up, and that's how they're reviewing the data. So it's pretty cool when you set these up well and you don't get asked about them. I think that's the biggest compliment that you can have, is just that it works and no one asks you about it. And I don't get any questions about our dashboard. So that makes me happy that it's something I don't have to go and fix, and that it just runs and works all the time. So it's really good stuff. And we're going to show some examples of some great dashboards and how we use them.
Yeah, so there's a ton of different people who need to see this data, from operators to shift supervisors, superintendents, and yeah, the list goes on and on. But each person might need to view the data in a slightly different way. An operator needs to see the data right now so they can make those adjustments on the machine if something is to take place. And so as a quality engineer, it might be your role to talk with those different people who want to see the data and figure out what the best tool is to show them that data, and then create that and work with them to visualize it so that they can effectively do their job as efficiently as possible.
Operators are the ones running the machine. So creating a center line with process and quality variables not only helps them see how they set up the process a previous time, but also how the product quality has reacted to those values. If you have a great run and want to match the values, you can even save a run and pull it back the next time the grade is being made. And we like to call those golden runs. So save the perfect run and then use it again.
Yeah, another thing that can be really helpful with making these center lines is actually creating groups. So in this example, we have a production group and a furnish group and an operations group. And what you can actually do with these groups is you can right click and trend them. So if you see a value starting to creep up, or the average is red, for some reason it's out of spec, and you want to see, well, am I trending up or down over time? You can actually put those values into a trend all at once instead of finding them in the tag browser and pulling them in one by one. And then you can actually see if your data is running in a direction you don't want it to go. So getting data into the control room really allows for changes to be made in real time, which will save rework and prevent your values from being out of spec. Another common display that is created is a dashboard. And I know that supervisors and superintendents love to see the dashboards because they're pretty straightforward. It is just showing the most recent value, but you can add the upper and lower specs on there. You can have timestamps on there as well, so you can see when the last test was run for that product. And it really gives that visual cue kind of pop out, as you can see some examples at the bottom, when something might be out of spec.
This is the screen I see up most when I'm out on the machine. And I believe that's because you can see everything in one shot. So the paper testers may be putting in all of their test data and having to scroll over or go to different sheets just because of the full quantity of the data. But this condenses all the critical specifications down onto one page. I think the other reason this works is because it's linked to the specifications. So as soon as something goes out of control, it's turning yellow. If it's out of spec, it's turning red. And it's an instant signal to a supervisor or an operator that something's wrong, and they can immediately start asking questions about it to paper test or researching it on the machine. So it's a great real-time tool to see everything and immediately address problems as they arise.
These kinds of dashboards are the ones that people just want to keep adding stuff to it. We have those buttons up there. They want to just keep adding things. So like you said, it's up on every computer. It's going to be a jumping off point to help you troubleshoot and go find the next thing.
I think another key with these tools is once they're set up well, they become the reference for people. So not only is it something that you look at all the time as a quality engineer, if you're trying to find the right quote unquote tag for something and you can't remember, there's like, I don't know, 10 L-star tags in the system, but you want to know which one everybody looks at, then you can always go back to these dashboards, right click, get the tag name, yep, I've got the right tag. That's the one everybody watches. And they become these reference sheets to make sure that you're pulling in the right data when you're bringing it out of PARCview into Excel.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you can also, that reminded me, in Excel, you can find a sheet. This one might be a little busy, but you can actually pull in all the tags from a graphic or a trend. So if you have something like that and you're like, well, I just need all the tags, you can actually start with just that, and it will pull all those tags right into the data normalized sheet for you. So that's a good way to get started. In terms of references for this real-time data, I did want to point out the PARCview 102 webinar. This is a really good webinar for anyone who might need help understanding how to utilize roll-up data or what roll-up data is. So those are the values in the center line. That's even some of the stuff in that Excel spreadsheet that was kind of getting the averages of things for you. So if you're interested in roll-up or just kind of a base understanding of how that works with your grade or your product, highly recommend that webinar. They do a good job of breaking it down. And then also using Centerline, there's a help manual for that, as well as configuration. And then we recently released a PARCview quick tip, which is about 2 minutes long, about how to flag data in dashboards with limits. So I think a lot of our other examples were how to flag data when you type in a value, but you can actually use the limits that you've already set up in PARCview and flag those values. So you don't have to retype them in, and you don't have to update them once you update the spec because they're tied into the spec. So check out that quick tip as well. Okay, specification maintenance. This is an important one.
This one is near and dear to my heart because we're doing this right now. We are doing a bunch of specification reviews, and it's very it's important, and it can be time consuming and cumbersome. So having tools like this that are set up that make it easy for you to do it makes all the difference. What we're normally doing on a day in and day out basis from a spec maintenance standpoint is what it says there in the first common task. We're doing regular reviews and updating specifications. So we have people within the quality team that are making updates on things here and there. And so we're not doing these big data pulls where we're trying to do larger team reviews normally. But right now, our team is going through that and doing some larger, bigger reviews. So you've got kind of a twofold part of this, which is the daily maintenance, and then taking this same data and reprocessing it and making it visual and understandable for other types of teams so that you could do collective team reviews on your specifications. We'll go through and show some examples of that using the Excel add-in and histograms and the PARC limits editor and limit notes.
In many industries, delivering a consistent product is going to be critical for maintaining customer satisfaction. And that's where spec reviews come into play. These reviews are to not just make sure that you're meeting your minimum standard, but also to make sure that your spec isn't too wide and drive that continuous improvement. You can consider if your specs are really wide and maybe you're running to the upper spec all the time. So you're in spec, but you're kind of toward the right-hand side, that upper spec limit. And then one time you make something toward the lower spec limit. Well, if you have specs that are such at a wide range, that product, sending it to a customer who's used to the upper spec value, it might not perform the same way. And so, kind of reviewing your specifications and making sure that you're consistently improving is gonna help your product consistency as well, and keep those customers satisfied.
I agree with what you're saying, Molly. The histogram is one of our primary tools for doing a spec review because it does a good job visualizing the full distribution of your data. So you can see where the highs and the lows are that you're running, as well as the mean. And if your target and your mean are off, it's very apparent on the histogram. So that's something that you can easily fix and discuss as a group. Is are we running to target, or are we running differently, and why is that happening? Or do we need to make adjustments? Do we need to change what we're communicating to the customer? Also, if you have a wide range and you need to narrow that up, that gives you opportunity for like Lean Six Sigma type processes to come in, and you've got specific things that you can go then in and target and say, hey, we need to narrow this distribution of this particular property, and you can narrow it down by grade and give a really good project proposal and scope to other engineers that may be supporting you with this data. The other tool that we like to use when we're doing these spec reviews is box plots or run data, and being able to show run to run that consistency. And we kind of went over some of that with the center lines earlier.
Yeah, and just before I move to the demo, I just in PARCview you can show your values in a histogram by different grades. So that's what this example is just calling out, is that you don't have to look at just the current grade. You can look at a specific grade and kind of flip through them rather quickly. So it just depends on what data you really need to see, whether you want to see it in PARCview or pull it into Excel or what have you. So I'll just do a quick demo of getting a histogram or in PARCview. So we're going to right click and go to histogram, which will pop up our same time frame, but I do want to go to the beginning of the month to view my data. So I'll just go ahead and do that and then hit plot again. And then histogram is going to get a little larger. And then I also want to show the limits here. So I'll click that and then choose my spec limits and then replot. So now I'm able to see, with those limits enabled, my CPK value and see, some other stats here on the right-hand side about what is important or what might need to be adjusted or changed. And we can see in this one, my average is a little higher than my target. But yeah, that's just a quick way to do a histogram in PARCview.
I think having the specifications in there with the histogram is a strong selling point for doing it within PARCview, because if you don't have that, then you're trying to pull the data separately into Excel, and then you're trying to pull the spec data and then overlay them on top of each other. And so that process becomes very manual, versus when you're doing it in PARCview, you can just hit the button and it already knows the specs and which grade they're for.
I did just want to mention a quick note or some best practices for maintaining specifications. First off, with PARC security, it's important to make sure that only the people you want to be changing the specs have that level of security. So, whether you keep that quality versus operations separate, that's pretty important. Also, make sure to create a new instance every time you change the specs, which is in the Excel add-in, you would be actually changing the date of the limit start date. And then we'll also show the example of in PARCview, you actually right click and create a new limit version. So that will actually enable you to see both limits on the trend at once. And then finally, it can be useful to add a change note as to why these limits changed. Something as simple as spec review, so you know that it was a purposeful change that was made, or customer review or customer request or something like that. That can really help. So when people ask, like, wait, I made this product last week and the specs were this, now all of a sudden we tighten up the specs and we're off grading these things, like it will give you a reason as to why.
I would add that it's also helpful to add in the change note when you're first putting them in as well. So it may be a brand new product code, but why did you put in those particular settings in the very beginning? Were you copying it from another product code? Maybe make a note of that as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so I'm going to start with editing it in Excel. So we're going to go to the dataPARC tab and then admin tools. Now this is, you do need to be signed in to be able to utilize this. So that's the sign in, sign out screen. And you'll need specific permissions as well. So I'll go ahead and choose my location and my source for the tags, and then I'll get limits. And then I'm going to edit this third tag here. So I'm gonna tighten up the limits a little bit here for the control limits and change this to about 315 and then the upper control to about 385. So I made those changes. I could submit this, but I want to have a date of when this started. So instead of 1970, I'm gonna change the date to August 1st. And we recorded this, I recorded this a little earlier than the webinar, so that's why I did that date, but I also want to be able to see the change in the trend for you guys. So now I'll go ahead and select this row and set the limits. Everything's green, it worked out. So now let's look at the trend. I'm just gonna copy this tag, throw it in Tag Browser, and then trend it. And then we'll go ahead and enable the limits by right-clicking on the description and going to Limits, Control. So we can see those limits are the 315 and 385 values. So now I'm going to go back to the beginning of the month and scroll over a little bit. And now we can see that before August 1st, I had my 400 range. And then after, that's when it dropped down to 385. So I'm able to see that change on the trend. And so now if there are any questions when I'm looking at historical data, I can really see that. Now we'll jump into how to do that in PARCview or what it looks like. So if you don't have most recent only selected, you'll see all of the limits that are available or all of the changes. But if you do have that checked off, you'll only see the most recent one. And right now, we don't actually have the change note value in Excel. I think that's in the pipeline, but right now you have to edit it here. So I'm saying it is per spec review, and then I'm adding my initials because it's easier than someone looking up the audit to see who changed this. So went ahead and add my initials so that people know who edited it and why. Now, in order to do the same thing within here, I'm going to add a new limit version. So that was just a right click and then new limit version. And then I'm going to change the date to a date in the future. Again, I did this earlier, so I know September 1st isn't the future, but in this instance it was. So you can also, if you're having all these limit changes and you want to set it for Q4 or Q1 or something in the future, you can do that and set a limit date in the future. So I have another change note, I'm making another limit change, and then I hit save. So now I have a different row for each of those times. And when I choose most recent only, I'm only going to see the active limit. So it did hide that September one for me because it wasn't September yet, it wasn't the active limit. So, that's another tip that you can use is if you're making these spec changes, you don't have to make them in the middle of the month or in the middle of the week. You could do them for the future so that you have time to communicate them to everyone and make sure everyone's on board. And then it will, all these changes will be implemented on September 1st, January 1st, whatever the case may be. And then Melissa alluded to this earlier, just that another best practice for creating a new grade could be copying specs from a new grade. So I'm not going to throw in an example here on how to do that, but we do have the step-by-step instructions in the tutorial section in the help manual. And so you can create your new grade and then copy those specs and edit the ones that you need to, or slightly adjust them for that new grade. And I don't have a slide here for resources, but we do have a webinar in that handout. So then our last section here is harnessing SQL, or SQL, however you want to say it. And this was really powerful for me when I was quality engineer. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
In this section, we're going to talk about some special use cases for your PARCview data and how to use that SQL to help you with those use cases. So some things that are coming to mind are there's data that exists that you're going to try and overlap with quality data or production data, but it's not something that you can add to PARCview. So they're not tags that you can add back in. Maybe it's customer data and it's for security reasons, you can't put that in there. You don't want everyone to have access to it, but you as the end user and quality need to overlay that type of information. So with SQL, you can pull those together from different types of databases and overlap that data from PARCview and from your MDEs and your production data, as well as those other systems. Another one that's coming to mind is maybe only a few people care about the result. So it's not something that you're going to go and publish to everyone within the PARCview reports, and only a couple of you are going to look at the output of the data. This may be a good application. And then another one is you've got a really specific query that you want to do with the data. And in my world, sometimes I don't even know what I want as a manager. So I don't want to hand it off to an engineer because I'm going to change what I'm asking them to pull 5 or 6 different times before I actually get what I want. So if I know how to use this tool within SQL, I can keep rerunning the query and looking at, is this showing me that the information that I want, and get it set up right before I hand it off to somebody to be able to set up for a report later. Or maybe I'm just doing something for a meeting that day and I need to be able to run the query multiple times and get the data in the right format without having to rebuild my dataPARC sheet every single time. So it's a good way when you've got those kind of off the wall specific requests, if you know how to use this. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so one of those examples I can think of where it might be easier to use SQL over maybe PARCview is finding production runtimes. As Melissa was talking about earlier, kind of how with paper machines and the TAPI role ID, you kind of have a standard like, okay, well, it was made on this day, but I don't know what time it was made. And that could be kind of tiring to go through, especially if one was made in January and another was made in May and another was made in June. Like, you have all the role IDs or you have all the product IDs or item IDs or something, but you just want the information in a table. This is going to get you that. So you're able to type those in and look up those 10 products at once rather than pulling up a trend and kind of trying to fight it, or even using the Excel add-in and pulling in a year's worth of data to find that start and end time. You can do it within, I don't know, seconds in SQL. So it can be really powerful, and that's an example we'll show here in a minute.
Another use case would be if someone accidentally sets the date way in the future, and then the MDE refreshes and the entry looks like it's disappeared and we don't know what timestamp was on the date. Using SQL, you could sort the values by time and find the entry and either fix it in SQL or go back into PARCview and fix it now that you know what timestamp it has.
Right. And a lot of the reports that we're using are using SQL as the base. So whether that's PARC reports, SQL Server report services, or even Power BI, having a knowledge of the database or of SQL is really gonna, drive those reports and make them easier to read and pull in the data that you want to see.
With SQL, we could pull the product summaries, which is similar to a report, but the limit notes are also in there, which is nice. So we have an Excel report with a pivot table that shows all of the spec changes for a grade, because SQL tables can also be incorporated into Excel. So if you're more comfortable with Excel, you could still use SQL to pull the data in, and then you can set it up the way you want to see it within Excel.
Right. Yeah. So you can just get all the information either in Excel or a PARC report or something like that. All right. Let's jump over to a quick demo. So first, I'm just going to open the databases and go to CTC config. Mine is called CTC config training because it's a training database, has fake data in there. But I'm going to expand all the tables, and all the tables you see here, you guys have. These are basic PARCview tables. CTC stands for Capstone Technology Corporation. So these are going to be standard. And then I went and opened up the views. A view is just an easier way to see the data, so it's a great place to start. So I'm going to open up my view, and then I'm going to sort by start event descending. And so I'll see the most recent values first. Again, mine's fake data, so I have events in the future all the way to 2025. Yours will be, or your most recent one of today. But maybe you want to see all the events of a specific tag. So I see that my sign tag there has a couple events. So I'll just copy and paste that in there. And now I'm going to get all of my values for my sign tag. I can also say, well, I want to see all my alarm events that are from the paper machine, so from PM2 or something. And so instead of using that equal sign, I'm going to use that like and those percent signs so that I can find something that is similar. So it looks like I only have one tag that's PM2 down, but I got all the information. Now we'll jump to the example I was talking about of production runtime. So CTC runs is going to be part of that roll-up data that we're doing. So you may or may not have data in here, but first I want to see where the product is equal to a specific number that I have. So I have a product grade. That means nothing. So mine isn't as intuitive as, a paper machine TAPI ID. So it's really challenging for me to know when the start and end time is. Then now say I have 2 or 3, I can just type those in. So I want to know when my product is coming in, and now I have that list. And those were right next to each other, but I can also throw in another one in here. So I can see I have some that were in April and then another one in May. And I'm able to get those start and end times, or maybe some other information that I want to see really quick. So this can be a powerful tool, especially depending on what you're trying to see and what information you're trying to get at. And I wish we could do 100 more examples about SQL, but it is definitely something that you have to use and figure out what is going to work for you and what you want to know. So just a little bit of helpful tips or resources. So if you go and ask for SQL permissions from your IT or something, there's a difference in permissions for altering data and executing data. So really in SQL, or if we do execute permissions, we're not editing the data. And then if we stick to select statements instead of insert statements, then we're actually just pulling information from the database. You know, if you're kind of nervous of being in the database, if you stick to select statements, you're not going to edit anything. And then if you are more advanced and you're going to actually create your own views or your own stored procedures or maybe a SQL tag template, then you want to create a CTC custom database. If you have worked with dataPARC engineers, you might already have this database, but it's for you to put in any of your queries or tables or custom information that's still related to PARCview. And we want to keep it separate because we're going to have updates to the tables, and you don't want to interfere with those updates, basically. And then in terms of resources you can use to learn SQL, highly recommend the W3 schools and Stack Overflow. If you Google specific thing, like how do I select from a table? Like one of those two resources are going to be really good for you. And then also, you can reach out to site resources or SQL admins and see if this is the right step for you in terms of getting the information you want to see more easily. And someone in your site will have more knowledge about SQL, and they can either help you get started or point you in a direction. And then I would also recommend using the community forum. As you saw, those tables, if you're trying to find something and you're like, well, I know this is saved in here because it's in PARCview, but I can't find the table it's in, ask the community forum, because all of the SQL setup, the databases are going to be the same. And then finally, you can definitely still use the Excel add-in webinar. So if SQL is just like too much of a step for you and you like the idea of seeing that information, but you want to start with Excel, there's still some data pulls that you're able to do in Excel. So learning what options there are in the data normalize sheet could be the next step for you instead. So with that really wraps up our presentation today. So we'll go ahead and jump over to see if anyone has any questions. And I did want to remind you that you do have that handout. So all of the resources that were mentioned today, they have links in that handout PDF, so you can access them directly.
And I want to give another shout out to Troy Fady, who was both Molly and I's mentor on a lot of these tools and taught us a bunch. We know he may get to watch this webinar, so if you're listening, Troy, we appreciate you. Thank you for everything you've done for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so as those questions come in, just wanted to remind everyone about that handout. There was a question about the runs table that I showed in SQL. So I mentioned that there may or may not be data in that runs table. And the question was, how do you get data in that table if there isn't any? So that is really going to be based on your rollup data. And so if you have rollups set up in Centerline, that's where that is going to be done. And then you also need some stuff set up in FireDaemon and on the server side. So if you need help with that, I would definitely say reach out to our support team, and they can help you get those rollup runs configured for your site. So you start seeing data in there. Makes it really easy to search some things. Melissa, there's a question here for you as to, are there any visualizations or displays that you would really like to have built that you haven't built yet and that you guys are kind of working on right now?
Oh, always. That's a great question. One of the ones that we're doing this last week actually is expanding on our spec review plan. We kind of started out throwing everything into Minitab, and it was really, really time consuming. So one of our engineers is taking some of the, and then we did the first like pilot round of the spec review, and we found that there were 3 kind of critical graphs that everybody wanted to see on each property. So we're taking those and coming up with a way to automate that within Excel. And so that you can basically dump everything in there, and you could just select your grade and it'll automatically spit out the 3 critical graphs that you want to see for any property in any grade on that machine. So it's kind of cool. It's kind of some integration between dataPARC and Excel and VBA. So that's something we have going on. And then another thing we have going on is we're working on updating our C of A system. So we have a older C of A system that's kind of been homegrown, and the dataPARC team is actually helping us rebuild a brand new system that's going to be integrated between all the PARCview data and manual data, and then like our ordering system that we have. And it's gonna upgrade kind of what the customer is seeing and change it to a different type of batch quantity. So that's kind of an in-depth, bigger project that we're working on.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions come through, but if you're typing or we missed your question, we will go ahead and email you those or post them on the forum with the answers as well. And just one last thing, we do have a survey after this, so if you want to suggest the next job position we explore or job title for this series, let us know. And if you want to share your experience in an upcoming webinar, definitely let us know. Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about Clearwater's experience. And yeah, thanks everyone else for joining. We'll see you on the next one.